Welcome to the Jamesport Christian Broadcast Network podcast, JCBN.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to JCBN, Jamesport Christian Broadcast Network. We are certainly glad that you joined us here today on this podcast. We do podcast on audio, uploaded to Podbean. We also load to Apple and several other places on the internet where you can download the podcast and maybe study, listen to it on your way to work, in your commute, maybe on your vacation, when you're cleaning the house or something like that. We also have cameras that we've installed in the office here so that we're able to do video to upload to video sites such as YouTube and Facebook and so forth. That way we can upload the audio to the audio sites and the video to the video sites. We cover all the spectrum there, and you can either watch it or you can listen to it. So that's one thing that we do. Again, we'd like to welcome you here. A study that I want to do today is on the future view. A futurist. What is a futurist? Everybody'd say, what is a future? What's a fact about a future? What's wrong with futurists? You see, I was a futurist for over 50 years. 59 years old. I grew up in the Church of Christ, and I was a futurist. I believe I fought it with every bit of my being, because that's what I was taught. I was taught that the day I went in the nursery with my mother. I mean, I was taught that in church, Christ is what's going to happen? Christ is going to come back. The sky is going to open up. Trees are going to shake. Ground's going to shake. Bodies come out of the ground, meet him in the air. The clouds are going to open up. The earth's going to burn with fervent heat. The universe is going to all be burned up. We're going to have a big throne scene. We're in front of the throne. The book of life's going to be open. And there are going to be sheep and goat there. And every knee's going to bow. Every tongue's going to confess. And the sheep's going to go off to heaven. The rest of the souls will go to eternal punishment and torments in a place called hell. And that's the futurist view. That's the way that I grew up. So maybe a lot of you that are listening to this program or watching this program are futurists. A lot of the population of the Christians in all denominations are futurists. And they believe in some type of future event. There's different levels of it. But some believe want to be taken, want to be left, all this future stuff that's going to happen. And I certainly know that the failed Church of Christ believes that in the futurist view that the sky's going to open up and we're all going to bodily jump up in the air one of these days. But we need to look at some facts, and I want to look at some facts today on this just for the simplicity of discussion, both all future and some partially future. I want I'm going to group all these together here and talk about the second coming. And why it hadn't happened yet for some of you guys out there that are futurists, and why it's been almost 2,000 years or over now, and nothing's happened. So first of all, I want to look at, if we look at the futurists, what are the 7 main assertions that to look at of the theology of futurism in those churches. First of all, again, they believe that it's, even now 2,000 years, Christ is still going to come back in the future from here. Everybody's still waiting on him in the future. You're waiting on him to come in the future. Your dad was waiting on him to come in the future. Your grandfather was waiting on him in the future. Great-great-great-grandfather was waiting to come in the future. That's one of the things they inserted. Number 2, Jesus coming personally, physically, visibly. He's going to have a body. He's going to be physical. He's going to be in the air. You're going to be able to see him just like he left and all that stuff. That's a second thing. And a third thing is there's a delay in his coming, according to the futurists, because he's not here yet. So there's just a big delay. So all those first century Christians, they're still waiting wherever they are. You believe the Thessalonians are still waiting on Christ to come back? And then you're still waiting on him today to come back if you're a futurist. So there's a delay there. Number 4, there's gaps between verses and passages that are asserted by futurists. We got a gap, or we're going to go to Matthew 24, and that turns a corner and goes here. They have to do these things in order to make their theology work out. If they don't do that, it's not going to work out for them. So there's gaps between verses and passages. Number 5, Jesus coming asserted is to be literal. Again, he's going to come back in a literal body and raise literal bodies. Number 6, many comings are asserted by the partial preterists. by a partial school of preterists. They believe there's a second coming and a third coming. Holger Neubauer said it best, one of the preachers in the Church of Christ. He said, they always look for an old MacDonald. Here coming, there coming, everywhere coming. You have so many comings, they have more than old McDonald's, he says. I really like that. 7, the assert Jerusalem temple. Some futurists believe that Jerusalem temple will be destroyed again in the future. That's how they see those things. Well, what about us? What about, since I've studied and learned that Christ already came back, I believe he already came back. So I would be called a preterist. I would say that he came back when the temple fell, when the old system fell down, when the old earth and the old heaven and all that stuff left. He came back at that time. So what do the preterists assert then, if that's what I am? Well, number one, things promised and written to that generation were fulfilled to that generation. That's what I believe as I've studied into that. Number two, all things to come upon Jesus' generation at that time, Matthew 23 and verse 36. Number three, all things were fulfilled in Jesus' time, in his generation, or rather in his generation, Luke 21:32, or that generation then. Number four, in that generation, in Jesus' generation, not to pass away until all was fulfilled, according to Matthew 24 and 34. Number five, we preterists believe that the Jerusalem temple and the end of the age occurred at the same time, Matthew 24, verses 1 through 3. Number six, we believe Jerusalem temple was destroyed in AD 70. We know that through history and, of course, through what we're taught and through a lot of old history books. And number seven, 2,000 years is not a necessary concept to us. It just doesn't make sense. All right, so as we look at this, the question that I would have to ask is, why? Why? According to the Futurists viewpoint, the whole 1,800 years, 2,000 years that have passed are to be viewed as blank prophecy. Nothing's there. It's blank. To them, the period having been purposely skipped over by time, in order to at once, rather to help the student of the Bible get them into the events and times that they're supposed to be in. So, just why? I could never understand it. I only saw that I was a futurist at the time for 50 years because I was taught that way. I was taught that way in church. I was taught that way in school. And if I ever looked at something and saw audience relevance or apocalyptic language and raised my hand and asked about it, I was told to be quiet. They didn't know how to answer it. And that's the way it happened. Then I never got to study much on it. I saw it. I saw a lot of it back then. And I studied it, and I buried it, and I studied it, and I put it away, and I studied it, and I screamed and kicked through it on my own to learn it. Why? Because I grew up in the Church of Christ. In the Church of Christ, the elders and the preachers and the people in the Church of Christ, we didn't have the internet back then. We didn't have a way. We didn't have podcasts we could do to get the word out. We could write a book and hope somebody would look at it. But we had papers through colleges, the college papers. They had some big papers that came along with the church, and you couldn't get a write-up in those. No way. That's false doctrine, man. Don't you know that? And they would look at that and say, that's false doctrine. And I fought it. And I stood up against it. And I said, no way he came back already. No way. And I would fight it. Well, why? Why did I do that? I was taught that. I was taught that way, and I thought that was the right way. But I always had this little window open in my head. And there's some people who have a little window open in their head, and they're willing to study like the Bereans did daily to see if those things are so or not. And I hope we have some brethren that listen to this podcast that are willing to just open their mind a little bit and see it. I'm not telling you have to do anything. Just study it. Look at it. Study it. Put them both side by side and see what you think. But I'm telling you, if you see the truth in this, you can't unsee it. And that's the truth of that. You see, it didn't always never made sense to me that God would pass over 2,000 years of Christian history in his prophecies, especially since the foundation prophecy of Daniel 2 reveals a very straightforward historical succession from the days of Babylon, all the way down to the end of time, the end of that age, rather, the end of the age. There's one person, they said this, I believe it was let's see here. I just kind of like this saying that Charles Meek, he said, then I got to eschatology. That's what we talk about the end of time study. Then he said, I got to eschatology. That is Bible prophecy about the so-called last things or end times. On this subject, I realized more and more that what I was hearing in the pulpit and in the popular Christian media did not match with what the Bible actually teaches. He went on to say, I discovered that there were 15 mentions of the last days in the New Testament, and the settling and fulfillment of none of them can be placed outside of the first century, so I dug in further for study. Unquote. Hey, that's the way I felt things happened to me at that time. But listen, to understand Bible prophecy, you have to be able to get a hold of what happened, what really happened in AD 70. What really happened to Jerusalem and that temple in AD 70. Because in AD 70, that marked the culmination of the Jewish-Roman War, in which Roman army decimated Jerusalem and the Jewish temple. They killed, they gutted, they crucified Christians. There was weeping, there was gnashing of teeth, there was fire, everything. It fell down. It just leveled out and fell down. Over 1 million Jews were killed. Now you go sit and think about that. Over 1 million Jews were killed. Israel ceased to exist as a nation. And that marvelous temple back then was leveled to the ground. Yeah. That's significant. Theologically, it's significant. Why? Because this is when the age-old system of sacrifices of sin ended forever. That's when the old heaven and the old earth went away. That old system the Jewish people practiced went away forever and ended. Now, while Jesus first marked the beginning of the New Covenant age, or when the New Covenant age came along, the Old Covenant age was swept away finally, of course, in AD 70. And there was a period, folks, of about 40 years in which the two systems existed side by side. The way I kind of show my students is I say, here's the old system coming, and then Jesus comes, and then we've got the new system and the old system existing together. They're trying to get others up to the new system and teach them about it, but this one's still going on, and then this one collapses. The old heaven and old earth leave, and now we're in the new. And that's kind of how I explain it. It was swept away, but they existed side by side. Over in Matthew 24, the verses 1 through 3, Jesus said there, or rather the Bible said that, then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, do you not see all these things? Surely I say to you, not one stone shall be left upon another that shall not be thrown down. Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming? And that present, that Greek, that's a present, folks. That's the word there. That parousia, that coming, it's present. That's the word there, present tense, okay? So what's going to be the sign of that? They're asking there, what's going to be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? And I know some of your Bibles, if you're looking at the King James Version, it says world, but that's an improper translation. End of the world, there's no such thing, folks. It means the end of that age. What's going to be the end of all that stuff? That's what they're asking him here. So we see in Luke 21 and 20, Luke chapter 21, the verses 20 through 22, the verses 32 and to 36, he says there, when you, he's talking to them, when you guys see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you guys, you people here, when you're going to know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountain. Let those in the city get out, and let those in the country neither enter the city, for this is the time of punishment in fulfillment of all, he says, that has been written. And he goes on to say, truly I tell you, he's talking to them, I tell you, this generation, he says, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things take place. All these things happen. Be always on the watch, he says, and pray that you, that's them, pray that you may not may be able to escape all that is about to happen. That's the Greek word mello. That means about to happen to you. Okay, it means, in other words, it's about to happen. Mello there. And that you, he's talking to them, may be able to stand before the Son of Man. Now you think about that. Go study that. Luke 21, 20 through 22. Over in Matthew 24, verse 6, 9, verse 15, verse 33, verse 34, verse 44, the Olivet Discourse, we find a lot of clear time statements, a lot of clear time restrictions, folks. And I've looked at one at least 7 times. Jesus restricted the events to those who he was speaking to at that time. 7 times. By what? By such phrases as when you see, okay, consider Matthew 21:6 if you would. And we looked at Luke 21 and 20. Also, just in case these apostles or these disciples were too dense to get it, if they just couldn't get it, he emphasized it. He said, truly, truly, I tell you, this generation, talking to them, this generation, truly I'm telling you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things happen. That was to them. That was emphasized. Luke 21:32. And folks, if there was any, after that, all that talk thereafter, if there's any lingering doubt with those guys, if there's any lingering doubt about when it would happen, he said what? In Luke 21:36, he said, pray that you may be able to escape all is about to happen. Wow. So he tells them, he emphasizes it to them just in case they didn't catch it, and then he's certainly going to, he just says, look, it's about to happen. I spent several years studying the Bible to get to the bottom of this problem that I'm fixing to tell you. Kicking, screaming much of the way, burying, looking, crying, praying, hoping, studying, but bear with me on this. Are you ready? The Bible never speaks of the end of the physical universe. Never. Never. I'll say it again. The Bible never speaks of the end of the physical universe. We've been deceived. I thought, wow, I've been deceived. What have I missed all this time? You see, all the mentions of the last days or the end refer to the old covenant age. The old heaven, the old earth, the old covenant age, that old time, the old Jerusalem, all that part. Remember, they existed together, and this one went away. It's gone. It's no longer there. That one existed together there. And but they all refer to that. They all refer to that old covenant age rather than a planet. The physical things it's like a fairy tale to me now. The planet. How many Christians believe that it's physical? And believe me, when they say that to me, I just think, wow, that just sounds so like a fairy tale, like just something you're making up there, But a lot of people now, since, like I said earlier, we have the internet, we are able to talk to each other, we're able to teach this truth and not be blinded anymore by that other stuff. We're able to embrace more of this doctrine known as preterism, this theology rather known as preterism. So don't let your eyes glaze over with that. Study it. It's like the Bereans did daily to see if the things are so or not that I'm saying. Weigh them out. Put one in each hand. Look at them. If you think it's funny and it's not right and you study it, well, hold on to what you hold on to, but at least study it. We're to study and look at those things. We're to test all things. The Bible tells us that. So, but we're going to walk through some of that, and won't do it all today, but we're going to walk through this. There are 4, actually, that I've had down here, 4 basic places in the Bible that Christians find what they think concerns the end of the world to them. In Acts chapter 2, Hebrews chapter 1, the book of Daniel, Matthew, 2 Peter 3. 2 Peter 3 talks about the universe burning language, that language, and they have to believe that that's physical. The last days in various books, the time of the end, not the end of time. It doesn't say that. It says the time of the end. End of what? End of that old planet, end of that old Jerusalem, that old world. All of that old stuff there. Look at the book of Daniel. We don't listen to the prophets, do we? End of the age. But it says end of the world, Mike, in the King James. Yes, but again, that wasn't translated properly. No, that wasn't a proper translation of that word there. That Greek word there was age. That age. End of the age. Things that we have to look at. And before I end this podcast, because I'm limited on time here on this podcast and vodcast, let me get you something to think about. I want you to go open your Bibles and study, because this is one of the verses that really turned me to know the truth. Really did. Matthew chapter 5 and verse 18. You go look at that. I'm going to read it here to you. And I want you to think about it. And I want you to go study it. It says, "For assuredly I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law until all is fulfilled." That's New King James Version. Again, listen to that. What he's saying there, I'm telling you. I tell you right now, he's saying, until heaven and earth pass away. Now, to you, heaven and earth are supposed to burn up and all that, but he's saying here, till heaven and earth pass away. Not one iota of that Old Testament law is going to end, and it's going to, until all that is fulfilled, until all I'm telling you here is fulfilled, until that earth and heaven leave. So what is he talking about? I want you to tell me, Matthew 5 and 18. I'll tell you right now what he's talking about. What I believe he's talking about is the old law, the old heaven, the old earth, Moses and his law, and that old way they did things back then, that was going to leave. And none of that was going to be fulfilled. None of that was going to end. None of that law, none of that old law was going to end until all that left, until all that stuff that he's talking about was fulfilled. You tell me what that means. You go look at that. If you're a futurist, I want you to look at that, and I want you to tell me what it means, because I guess you're still under the old law, because heaven is still out there, and earth, we're still standing on it, hadn't passed away yet, so the old law must have not passed away. Well, if you listen to the voice of the prophets and you go back and study your Bible, you're going to understand what that heaven and what that earth meant. You're going to understand what an old heaven and an old earth is, and what the new heaven and the new earth is that we're in. It's right. Apocalyptic language. Audience relevance. It's not a funnel, folks. It's true and it's real. Another book I would like for you to look up is when Revelation was written. Because Revelation, if you understand it from this view, from the preterist view, you understand it. It's easy. We all teach it alike. But if you go into the failed Church of Christ or some of these other churches that teach Revelation, every one of them's different. I've never had one teacher that was near. Some of them were close, but they weren't the same. But go and read a book by a great minister that used to preach in the Church of Christ. He's passed away now. Foy Wallace Jr. Look his book up. He agrees that the Revelation was written before AD 70. I agree with it now that I've looked at it and studied it, and I think you will too. But that's a good book to look at Revelation and when it was written, because a lot of people look at the latter date, and they have to. They have to look at the latter date. I had to look at the latter date to make all that stuff fit. To make all that stuff I had in my mind, all that fairy tale stuff fit, I had to look at the future. But actually, Revelation was written before AD 70. So I want to implore you to go look at that. Well, that's all my time that I have for this podcast. We'll take up more study here, and we'll continue with the study here on our next podcast. And well, I certainly appreciate you for joining us here with JCBN, the Jamesport Christian Broadcast Network, and be able to bring you these things here on this audio podcast. And also, we'll do it in video form again. So again, may God bless you. Hope you have a good rest of the week, and take care of yourself.